Welcome to the Renaissance and welcome to the Negro Appellation, a reply, part 1. And here is a big shout out to our donors. We say thank you very much. And remember, you too could support us at paypal.me/ourrenaissance or patreon.com/ourrenaissance. Thank you. And to you, our dear viewer, it is never our intention to offend anyone with our videos. It is not also our intention to suggest, insinuate, or preach hate towards any group, race, tribe, or person. This video is not a propaganda video and never a deliberate attempt to misinform anyone. The goal is for you to look for the books, journals, magazines, or other publications referenced and study them yourself. Remember, who questions much shall learn much and retains much. Francis Bacon. And from our brother Carter G. Woodson, the thought of the inferiority of the Negro is drilled into him in almost every class he enters and in almost every book he studies. So, do you remember our response to our use of the Negro appellation? Do you remember the questions we issued the response for? Do you also remember the user that talked about the Emancipation Proclamation? Do you remember our videos on the Negro divides? And if so, have you ever heard when people tell us that the slave trade had ended long ago, or that we should proffer a solution rather than talking about history? Or that books we reference were written by the slave masters, but they never provide alternatives? Or that something like Africans sold other Africans is accurate? Have you ever had any of those? And if you have you ever researched any of those? In any case, you probably have heard the so-called xenophobic attacks in South Africa, and you have heard about apartheid South Africa. You have probably also heard about the pencil test, and that will be very good for those who claim that the woolly hair of the Negro does not matter. Now remember, the Zulus are not Negroes. The slave trade didn't go to South Africa. But why we mention this hair thing and the pencil test is for you to research it yourself, to understand what the slave master thinks and what he does at any moment in time. Then you have probably also heard about Fulani herdsmen killing in Nigeria. And then you still have heard we are all Africans. Have you ever also wondered why those people that shout we are all Africans are nowhere to be found as these so-called xenophobic attacks are going on? Have you ever heard anything from the so-called African Union, ECOWAS, and all those useless organizations? Again, this was how the slave trade happened, but we're going to try to look at this xenophobic attack in a different way to show you that it was the same game they played during the slave trade that they are still playing till today. Also, have you ever tried to ask how they know who to attack, since some people think all Africans are the same? Now remember, some people claim that there was no way they could have captured the slaves because they all look alike. How did they know who to capture and all that? You see some even conscious groups that claim that, oh, it was impossible, they couldn't have captured it because they all look alike. Whereas every Negro, every African, even every black person knows that we are all different. The South Africans are totally different from the Nigerians and the Negroes and the Zulus, Bantus, Fulanis, Barbars, Tuaregs, name it. Have you also wondered why they are only attacking supposedly black people and not Arabs, not Europeans, not even Asians, but they are same black people? That should begin to tell you how the slave trade could have happened. Then, if they also attack other Africans like the Egyptians, Algerians, etc., what does that mean? Have you tried to ask why they do not just attack anybody? Why they think it is only these people that are taking their jobs? Are the South Africans really the same as those they are attacking? That should be your question to answer. You should be able to tell us if they are really the same people. How come they are only attacking? This is not the first time it's happening, it's not the second time, and it's not going to be the last time. So do you think they are really the same with the people they are attacking? Some of them claim, oh yeah, because some Negroes are married to some South Africans, you will expect that, oh, they are now the same people. They are not. We will try to look at this in a different video, but our challenge this moment is to look at that Negro appellation and the response we provided to one of our viewers who also gave us what he thinks. So here are the comments that we got from some of our viewers, and particularly the same viewer that actually said something about the Emancipation Proclamation. And he said, as far as troops who conducted raids, from what I have read, the transatlantic slave trade lasted for centuries and was in a large area. The part of Africa known by the name of Guinea, to which the trade for slaves is carried on, extends along the coast above 3,400 miles from Senegal to Angola and includes a variety of kingdoms. Of these, the most considerable is the Kingdom of Benin, both as to extent and wealth, the richness and cultivation of the soil, the power of the king, and the number and warlike disposition of the inhabitants. So our interest is to also remind you about that thing they say, that the best way to hide something from black people is to put it in a book. Many think it's just because they don't read. The main issue there is they read without understanding what they read. They read A and choose to say it's B. An average black man is very, very sentimental. So he tries to read what he believes into whatever is written. So if he's reading a book, he is actually reading what he has in mind, or what he wants to believe, what he wants to hear. That's what he's reading. So we're going to show you what this viewer read and what the book said and what he read from the books, so you understand what we're talking about. Please remember that this was the same viewer that was defending the Nigerian army and claimed that they were actually formed in 1863, whereas they just renamed the raiding troops they had before then. He is the same user that had issues with our quote of Washington, alleging that he also held slaves. Meanwhile, the same person is defending the people that actually captured the slaves that George Washington bought. So you see how hypocritical some people can be. We've always suspected he might just be a conditioned Negro or a Hamitic or Negroid group, but you will see how he defends the people that actually captured the slaves, despite what the books are saying. So we'll go further to show you what he is writing, so you understand where we're coming from. But before we do that, let us remember certain things you must know about Negroes and what makes them perfect slaves. Remember also that the slave master recorded that if an idea gets into the head of a Negro, to eradicate that idea can only be by cutting the head off. So you understand the reason he was conditioned with whatever they told him. Now, the reason he is writing some of the things is because that's how he was conditioned. So let us reference A History of the Colonization of Africa by Alien Races by Sir Harry H. Johnston, and it was published 1899. And there it tells us that the Negro has no idea of racial affinity. So you see why he will believe the slave master ahead of his siblings. That's natural with the conquered Negro. He will equally align himself to the white or to the yellow races in order to subdue his fellow black or to regain his freedom from the domination of another Negro tribe. There may be here and there a revolt against the white rule in such and such a state, but the diverse civilization under which the African will be trained and the different languages he will be taught to talk will be sufficient to make him as dissimilar in each national development as the white man has become in Europe. So our interest is for you to see that he will always align himself with the yellow races or the slave master against his own. This is normal with the Negro. So it goes further to also tell us that the Negro in general is a born slave. He is possessed of great physical strength, docility, cheerfulness of disposition, a short memory for sorrows and cruelties, and an easily aroused gratitude for kindness and just dealing. He does not suffer from homesickness to the overbearing extent that afflicts other people torn from their homes, and provided he is well fed, he is easily made happy. So you understand why, instead of thinking about home or anything like it, the so-called African Americans are buying into the slave masters' new narrative of how they are aborigine or they are indigenous. Now, if you take a little time and conduct your research, you will discover that when Great Britain was like America today during the slave trade, the Negroes there also claimed the same thing. Whereas the Negroes in America, remember, America was just a plantation. It was where the European companies came to establish plantations where the Negroes were working and laboring in as slaves. So when they talk about slaves, don't just think about it as a word. You have to look at what they were doing. Remember, there were no tractors, there were no bulldozers, there were no heavy equipment like you see today. So at that time, the whole farming was done by the Negroes. And remember, they were told that the Almighty sent them there to come and cultivate the land. So when you study your Bible, as in, don't study it as something written by anything other than man, you will discover that it says they should cultivate the land and all those kind of things. Those are some of the subtle ways the slave master got it into the brains of the Negro that he was created to be a slave. But then, let's just take this a little further. And it says, he can toil hard under the hot sun and in the unhealthy climates of the torrid zone. Note this very well. He has little or no race fellowships. That is to say, he has no sympathy for other Negroes. He recognizes and follows his master independent of any race affinities. And as he is usually a strong man and a good fighter, he has come into request not only as a laborer but as a soldier. Negro slaves were imported into Lower Egypt as servants. A few may have reached Carthage and Rome, but the determined exploitation of the black races did not begin on a large scale till the Mohammedan conquest of Africa. So you hear sometimes people tell you that, oh, the Arabs did their own slavery first before the Europeans and all that. They are all one and the same. They all happened simultaneously, but slightly in a different sync or in a different sequence than you are being told. So, but our interest is the fact that he has no sympathy for other Negroes and has no race fellowships. That's why you see that when you are talking about South Africa today, you think it's the same people. It's not. That's where the issue is. It's never the same. The slave trade didn't get to South Africa. No so-called African Americans came from the South African area. Remember, it used to be called Negro Land and Guinea. It wasn't called Africa as at the time the slave trade started, which will challenge you to investigate. So if you're talking about anything at that time, they were called Hottentots, Bushmen, like the Zulus. So they were not Negroes. So you need to understand this very, very, very well. And of course, this map you see on your screen, the shaded portions show you exactly where they got the slaves from, all the areas the slaves were acquired from. You can see that none came from South Africa, none came from Northern Africa. Remember very well too that the area used to be known as Guinea or Negro Land and not any Africa the way you see it today. You have to take your minds back in time to understand it very well. So you see clearly that it is bordered around where you have Biafra. You see around the Senegambia area. You see all the places where, and it had nothing to do with those that lived on the coast, because there were still coasts in South Africa area. So why didn't it get to them? So again, if you look at the xenophobic attacks today, you would think that it's the same people attacking themselves. It's not. And we're going to show you why they are not in a different video. But just bear in mind that no so-called African Americans came from South Africa, Zimbabwe, Somalia, all those areas. No. They were all from what was called Central Africa, or what was Negro Land and Guinea. That's where they all came from. So you need to bear that in mind. Again, notice that it says the Negro, more than any other human type, has been marked out by his mental and physical characteristics as the servant of other races. So when you see them gang up, for example, when you see these xenophobic attacks in South Africa, don't look at it on the surface. It's deeper than what you're seeing. It has nothing to do with the same people attacking themselves. The South Africans are not Negroes. They are Hottentots and Bushmen, which you can investigate. The slave trade didn't get there, which you can see on your map. So you can't say they are attacking the same people. They are attacking Negroes. The bulk of who they are attacking are the Negroes. The slave master knows this. The slave master's media knows this, but the Negroes do not know it because of that lack of racial affinity, and they have no sympathy for other Negroes. So you will see that those in the US will just be talking about how Africans attacking other Africans, whereas the place was not even called Africa as at the time the slave trade started. So you need to bear this very important point in mind. Whereas if they had any ideas or any racial affinity, they would have known that it is the Negroes that are being attacked, and they would have defended their own people, knowing that they are in the same condition in the United States as well. And of course, that way the slave master will be checked in one way or another. But let's just move forward. So here are the viewers' comments that attracted this response. And you see where he says, as far as troops who conducted raids, from what I have read, the transatlantic slave trade lasted for centuries and was in a large area. Now you notice that as a conditioned Negro, he only knows about the transatlantic slave trade. He doesn't know about the trans-Sahara slave trade. Both happened simultaneously. While the transatlantic slave trade referred to the Negroes shipped across the Atlantic, the trans-Sahara slave trade referred to the Negroes shipped or taken across the desert on foot. And going further, it says, the part of Africa known by the name of Guinea, to which the trade for slaves is carried on, extends along the coast above 3,400 miles from Senegal to Angola and includes a variety of kingdoms. Of these, the most considerable is the Kingdom of Benin, both as to extent and wealth, the richness and cultivation of the soil, the power of the king, and the number and warlike disposition of the inhabitants. But our interest is for you to see what he described the place as. Now remember, this is the same person defending that the Nigerian army was created or formed in 1863 from 5 people. But going further down, you see where he claims that, so he is saying that slaves were taken from Guinea, and he shows us the full reach of Guinea. Some areas are not even majority Fulani. Note this very well. You see where he's going. He's trying to defend Fulani because he doesn't understand how the slave trade happened. Not because he lacks the ability to, but because he has been conditioned with a particular line of thought, which unfortunately, if an idea gets into the head of a Negro, to eradicate it can only be by cutting the head off. He thinks that the Fulani will raid where they are, just like thinking that somebody will be raiding his family, immediate family, and burning down the place, which we are going to show him is not correct. He has to read further. So he goes further to say, I accept they were involved, but I do not believe that they had one army that stretched from Senegal to Angola. So this is where he gets it wrong as well, and we shall educate him further. Let's look at another comment he made. So here he says, 20 Negroes which were brought to Virginia in a Dutch man of war from Africa in 1620 formed the germ of the slave population in the North American republics. Notice he said North American republics, not United States of America. Note this very well. From this time, the trade in slaves between Africa and America was continued till the year 1807. During this period, slavery was introduced into all of the original 13 states. Note this very well. The entire number of slaves imported into the United States from Africa is estimated as 330,000. They belonged chiefly to the tribes of the Mandingos, Cromantis, Fidas, Igbos, Fantis, Ashantis. This is what he said. We take pleasure in acknowledging our indebtedness to the excellent work of the Honorable T.R.R. Cobb, an inquiry into the law of Negro slavery in America, Philadelphia and Savannah, 1858, for which accurate and scientific information respecting the history and laws of slavery in America, those disposed to pursue their inquiries in this direction will find much that is valuable in his work to repay the trouble of consulting it. So he goes further to say, It is not unusual to hear it asserted that slavery never existed in Massachusetts. According to the census of 1754, there were in the state 2,448 slaves over 16 years of age, of which 1,000 were in Boston. See also Hidret History of the United States, Volume I, page 419. But our interest is what he cited here and the alleged 20 Negroes brought in whatever Dutch vessel. Now, if you notice, their interest is this 330,000 that is written here. Remember, they are planning to change the narrative to how they are indigenous. Now, the plan is, if they change it to how they are indigenous, nobody can in the next future ever say that the United States was built through Negro slave labor. Remember, one of the things they do and think and teach the Negro and culture him along is that he cannot exist without others, and that he is subservient permanently and forever. So one of the reasons they deny anything the Negro achieves is not to give him that idea that he could do things independent of himself. This is why self-determination is a big problem in sub-Saharan Africa till today. When the Negroes ask for independence, they are treated exactly the same way like a slave that tried to escape during the slave trade, where they will amputate him or hang him publicly. That's the same thing they do. That's why you see that there are places like Amazonia and Biafra. They go to war the moment there is any idea that the Negroes of those areas want to be free. We want you to look at the map we looked at earlier, the map of the slave trade, and you see how concentrated that area where Amazonia and Biafra are on the map. And here you see where we asked the user to give us a breakdown of how possible it is for one man to catch another man. And in conclusion, we said, if it is recorded that Negroes had no organized army and the raiders came as armies, could you tell us who they are? Thank you. And his response was that, of course, the man will not say, okay, that's the man that is somebody is trying to sell or abduct. Now remember, the reason the concept of sell is there is because the slave master convinced the whole world with his propaganda and thakia that the Negroes were beasts akin to cattle. You just go and take them the way you would take any other thing. We can show you the books. If we don't get too long on this video, we will show you where they wrote it as such that the women give birth to slaves and just give it away to them free. So you don't think we are making up anything. You can also read them yourself. So he claims that one man could walk into another man's house, and look at how he says they will be caught. He says, of course, the man will not say okay. He will resist. However, if a man hits man B, that's man A hits man B in the head and knocks him out, he can then or now tie him up. He can then force him to go with him, and he can then sell him or hold him for ransom. So you see the challenge of the Negro brain. He has been conditioned to think that it was possible for somebody to come and hit you on the head and carry. We don't know if you have ever carried somebody who is unconscious before, and then think about carrying him from one place to another place you don't even know about. And remember, these people do not buy slaves that are not strong. They have to check them like animals, look at their fingers, look at their everything about them has to be perfect before they are bought. Now the slaves are commanded to make sure that they stand erect, stand strong, so that the masters can buy them. Now he wants to tell us that you just hit one man and go and take him to where you can sell. So you see that he obviously has not read. And if he had read, he would have understood that there is no way one man can do that and walk for distances covering over 2, 3, 4, 5 days or 6 months or 3 months or a month and come back. But the army could do that, which we are going to show you shortly anyway. Let us reference the island of Cuba. Its resources, progress and prospects. British West India colonies by R.R. Madden, and it was published 1858. So here it gives us a little statistics of slavery and slave trade in 1847, and it says by Christian powers annually enslaved is 100,000, and by Mohammedan powers 50,000, and total is 170,000, and then destroyed in capturing the slaves 75,000. Now this individual wants us to believe that They would have known the number if it was just one individual going to carry another. So you notice he thinks we are talking of the slave master carrying a ship that could carry 700 people and come and take one person. That's just what he's thinking. While he's thinking about a golf club, the slave master is thinking about a golf course. The entire big thing, the big picture, which the Negro doesn't see often. He just sees himself. Now notice this same guy and ask yourself, why is he interested in protecting those that actually captured the slaves, the slave hunters? Now if you notice, some so-called African Americans will be saying, oh, the Africans sold us. Now they are seeing a way to find out who did the selling. They are now no longer interested. They want to defend the master. You notice how this user is defending both the army he has no history of. The same army is killing innocent people till today. In fact, a general that retired from the Nigerian army was talking about how they collude with the slave hunters of old, but he is still defending them. That's how the Negro is. He has no sympathy for other Negroes. That's the same thing that you see happening in South Africa. So you might think that it is the same people killing themselves. They are not. So further down, you see where it tells us that African slave trade since 1808 to 1840 carried away to the Brazils 2.5 million, ditto to Spanish colonies 1 million, ditto to the French colonies, Mexico and the United States 500,000, captured and liberated and dead after capture 250,000, 4.2 million. Now at least you saw where he wrote 300 and something thousand, but this book is telling us 500,000 here. And remember also that the United States hadn't become United States at that time. It was just a collection of colonies. Bear this important point in mind. Please also bear in mind that this is talking about 1808 to 1840. At a time they claimed they had outlawed slavery to the United States. You need to bear this in mind. So between 1808 to 1840, they had exported 500,000 slaves to the US alone. But this individual wants us to believe that from 1434 that the slave trade started till this 1840, let's say, give or take, or to 1863, that only 330,000 were exported. So you can see how their lives collapse the moment you apply common sense to it. Remember, this is 500,000 at a time they claimed they had outlawed the slave trade in 1808. Now compare what was happening before the 1808 that they claimed to have outlawed it. Also, coming to his defense of the Fulani, let us reference Up the Niger, narrative of Major Cloud MacDonald's mission to the Niger and Benue Rivers, West Africa, by Captain A.F. Mokla Ferryman, and it was published 1892. And there it tells us that 3 miles from the river lies the town of Ela, peopled by some 3,000 Igbos who live in continual dread of the slave-raiding Mohammedans of the north. But now he wants us to believe that it was the same Igbos selling themselves. But here he tells us who they were scared of at that time. Now we shall look at this Ela and this scenario in a different video. Let us also reference Travels and Discoveries in North and Central Africa, being a journal of an expedition undertaken under the auspices of His Britannic Majesty's government in the years 1849 to 1855 by Henry Bath, PhD, in 3 volumes, and it's volume 3. And there it tells us that Igbo dwelling in 9 villages on the Blackwater, back in Roa, as many of the Hausa people call the Kwara, although the Igbo and other tribes in the district give the name Blackwater in general to the Benue, while they distinguish the Kwara as the White Water. The Igbo, whom as well as the Ding Ding, the Fulbi, believed to be Christians, have neither cattle, horses nor asses, but plenty of large sheep, goats, swine and poultry. The expedition which my informant accompanied in 1848-9 spent 2 months in this country, plundering it and carrying away a great many slaves. Since that time, the Fulbi can in some respects truly say that their empire extends as far as the sea. Now he is defending these same people that spent these 2 months in an expedition. capturing the slaves from what they called the Igbo country, the way they put it. But he is telling us that they didn't. They don't live near there, and they don't live in all the other places. He forgets that an army goes to fight wherever they were fighting. The armies in those were the slave hunting terror groups. They were not countries at that time. Some of them were emirates. So wherever the slaves were found to be, they go and raid it. They don't raid a place a second time, because the moment the slaves are captured, the place is gone, is desolated. So we don't understand where this user reads his own articles from. Anywhere that is raided is ended. They set the houses on fire, burn them down totally, and that's it. The city is gone. That's why you see the map then is totally different from what it is today. And that's their game with the slave master. But let's move forward. Let us also reference The Mohammedan Emirates of Nigeria by S.J. Hogben, and it was published in 1930. And there we are told that the 19th century saw considerable activity from the direction of Masina, a town largely inhabited by Fulani. They had come down many centuries before from Edra, the desert country to the north of the Senegal River. Note that very well. He is telling us where the Fulanis were and where they are not. He forgets that they were moving down to where the slaves are, because the slave master uses them to capture his slaves. Now, don't make any mistakes about this. The Arabs and the Europeans did the raidings themselves as well, which we can show you. If you're in doubt, just put it in the comment section if you have not read it yourself. There is no way the Negroes could have done it themselves. They didn't have the weapons, they didn't have the technique, and they didn't have a standing army, which is what we're challenging this user to provide us with something sensible of how the slaves could have been acquired by the Negroes themselves. And he has been so far unable to. He forgets that the narrative of the slave master of a cell is simply because he claimed that the Negroes were beasts at that time, lower than cattle. So that was his explanation to those that asked him, how could you be buying human beings? And the slave master, you know, he's very powerful in propaganda. That's the same way he has so demonized what you will call Negro land and Guinea, to the point that you see the so-called African Americans all denying from being from there, because they have no sympathy for other Negroes. As much as they are suffering there, they believe they are in heaven. That's how the slave trade and the slave mentality of the Negro works. So it goes further to tell us that the Fulani rose as the Moors declined. Remember, these Moors were the raiders of past before the Fulanis and the Arabs and the Europeans. It goes further to say, Mungo Park says that the Moors were divided into many tribes and lacked cohesion. He mentions that they were cruel and barbarous and preyed on the Negroes. See, the same Negroes. Just bear in mind that the mindset of everyone towards the Negro is, he is a slave. It doesn't matter if you believe us, but if you research it, you will see it. All of them do it together, which we shall continue to explain to you as much as we can until you get your head around it and you research it yourself. So he goes further to say, he mentions that they were cruel and barbarous and preyed on the Negroes. They were not an agricultural people. They had been dispossessed of their big towns on the Niger by the Tuaregs, who, pressing down from the north, had established a Tuareg kingdom. In 1770, they had taken Gao, and 1800 they captured Timbuktu. The Fulani had been in Senegal for over 1,000 years. Their origin is not established and is a subject full of controversy. They are distinctly non-Negro, varying in color from light red to black, usually slightly built and thin-featured. But now you will see that because of the absence of racial affinity, you will see some so-called African Americans celebrating the Fulani. So when they are told that the Fulani has massacred a community, or they have raided one community or the other, they will pretend not to hear, because they think they are the same with them. They wouldn't know that that's the same people that sold their forefathers. And they are doing the same things to the Negroes left behind in Africa today and other groups that are powerless. We want to ask you this simple question, which we are going to do shortly. It's about the xenophobic attacks. You see it being discussed, you see it everywhere on slave masters media. But only 12 or 13 people were killed. Imagine when they kill thousands in what is middle belt of Nigeria, in Biafra, in Ambazonia. Why do you think the slave master doesn't talk about it? But only 12 people, you are already shouting and talking about South Africa and xenophobia. Now, a very quick look at this other incident, which was sometime in 2014. Fulani herdsmen murdered 79 people. This is just one too many. We don't want to go into more than this. Did you get any uproar? But the South African one is just how many people? Perhaps they sent some people to go and send a smoke alert. Now remember, if you see them shouting the way they are shouting, you will think they will do anything. Nothing is going to be done about it. They are not going to pay those whose properties they have destroyed there, especially the Negroes, of course. They are not going to even try anybody. That's the truth about it. So that's exactly how they did the slave trade. All they are doing now is to divert attention from what they are doing in Biafra and Ambazonia. Bear this very important point in mind. So this is why this user, when we look at them, we just laugh because they refuse to read between the lines. But then let's still move forward with some of the things he raised there. Let us also reference the Journal of Negro History, Carter G. Woodson, Volume 2, and it was published in 1917. And there it tells us the following. Now remember, this is edited by a so-called African American. He would have been a Negro then anyways. You see how they changed the appellation. That's what they want to do again with this Indian thing. So you see where they are going. Now you see this same user telling you that, oh, only 300,000 were shipped and all that. If you go and read that thing from where they got the 300,000, you will discover that it might just be for something like between year A and year B. They decided to take it to be the whole period just to be able to sell their dummy to the Negroes. But we will continue to show you how to debunk their lies. The Felatas, that's the Fulanis, who since the beginning of the 19th century have been the dominators of the Negritians, that's Nigeria. Negritia was the name for Nigeria before they remodeled their slave trade, repackaged it to what it is today. So there is nothing changing except how they are doing it. In West Africa, used to carry on a merciless campaign against their subjects, destroying their homes and fields and seizing women and children by the thousands to batter away to the west or to send across the desert. So you see the transatlantic and trans-Sahara slave trade we talked to you about. You see that it is them doing the same thing. But that's why you see that the slave master protects them. Again, we ask you, why do you think they are raising hell over less than 20 people allegedly killed in South Africa, but they do not talk about hundreds and thousands they are killing in what is middle belt of Nigeria today, in Nigeria, in Cameroon, in Biafra, in Ambazonia? Why do you think they keep quiet about them? That should begin to give you an idea of what they are doing. Don't worry or listen to what they are hyping about. Try to use your own brain and put two and two together. That might just be a distraction they created with the South African thing, from the fact that an impostor is believed to be replacing Buhari, or the fact that they just want to distract people from the jihad going on there. You need to bear this important point in mind. We read what the Negroes are like in the beginning just to show you some of their games, so you understand what they know about the Negroes. So it goes further to say that describing the effects of a Felata raid, that's a Fulani raid, Bath says, now remember our dear viewer that claimed that you go and carry one person to go and sell. Let him read this himself. The whole village, which only a few moments before had been the abode of comfort and happiness, was destroyed by fire and made desolate. Slaughtered men with their limbs severed from their bodies were lying about in all directions and made passers-by shudder with horror. But he wants to believe it's one person carrying another person to a village 2 or 3 months away and then coming back. So you see that he lacks any understanding of what the books are actually saying. There is no place you will see a book talking about one person or 2 people. They will always tell you about war, razzia, slave raids, which is exactly what it's all about. Then the rest are the lies the slave master told about the Negroes. Remember, they told the world that the Negroes were actually slaves in Africa, wherever they were. So they were actually taking them to save them from being eaten. That's some of the things they said. You need to find out some of the reasons they also said should prevent them from abolishing the trade. So you need to bear this important point in mind. We hope our dear viewer would have known that it was a Fulani business after the Moors, the Europeans and the Arabs. The reason they keep quiet about it is because they believe in that system of enemy within. So here you see where it says the purchase of felatas, that's the Fulanis, or pregnant Negro women or Jews was strictly forbidden by the Sultan. That's the Sultan of the Fulani, now called Sultan of Sokoto. But now he is still telling us that no, it was the Negroes selling themselves. At least we have seen severally that the Fulanis are not Negroes. And it goes further to say the felatas, that's the Fulanis, were not bought because they boasted of being white people. The Negro women could not be bought because the child to be born would be the property of the Sultan if its mother were a heathen, and it would be free if the mother were a Mohammedan. So you see the subtle ways they used to convert and bring people to Islam. Now, if you think the religion is true or Christianity is true, especially if you're a Negro, we shall do another video to show you how it's impossible that it could have been true. No matter how you look at it, you might believe it, but the important thing is if you look at the history and look at how they even sold the religion, you will understand that it can't be true. So it goes further to say the Jew Negroes could not be bought because they were jewelers, tailors, artisans, and indispensable negotiators. Now this also tells us who the Jews were or could have been. Now remember, you to ask yourself, when did the word Jew come into existence on planet Earth? So you begin to understand what games they are playing. Why not ask yourself where the black Jews are now, today? Where are they? So that's the same thing they are still doing in that place, which we shall continue to show you. And here it gives us something of interest, and it says the raiding troops, after having been on the campaign for nearly a month, returned with 2,000 captives who marched in front of the column. The men, women, old and young, almost all nude or half-clad in ragged blue cloth, and the children piled upon the camels. The women were groaning and the children crying, while the men, though seemingly more resigned, bore bloody marks upon their backs made by the whips. The convoy was marched to the palace, where its arrival was announced to the Sultan by a band of musicians. The Sultan complimented the chief, examined the slaves, and ordered them to the slave market, and the next morning the caravan leaders were invited to come and make their purchases. Now we ask you, our dear viewer, Professor Watt, to explain to us, at least you believe that the Negroes could have sold themselves. We had shown you severally that it couldn't have been the Negroes. The problem you have is because you think that the divisions of the slave master amongst the Negroes holds. That's why the problem is there. You think because they manufactured Igbo, Yoruba, or Hausa or anything at any point means the Negroes are different. They are all the same, which we shall continue to show you. Let us also reference a geographical survey of Africa, its rivers, lakes, mountains, production, states, population, etc. And it was written by James McQueen, Esquire, and published in 1840. And there it shows us that it is the Sultan of the Fulani that provides them with the map and location of all the countries in the Bight of Biafra and Benin at that time. Remember, it was the same people that coined Yoruba or Yareba for the group you call Yoruba today. So it says the positions of these countries are sufficiently ascertained, for Sultan Bello gives us the position of Ataga or Athagara, the Ida of Led, a great province which the former states reaches to the sea, where the ships of Christians come to trade. East of this, or as he says, to the right, lies the province of Nafra, or as it is better known to Europeans by the name of Biafra. And of course, you can pause this video and read the entire thing yourself, but our interest is to show you that it is the Sultan that provides them with all the information they needed about all those areas. That's why they are always going there anyway. So you need to bear this important point in mind. If he didn't have access to those places, how could he have known where they were and who they were at that time? Remember, like we told you, the Negroes were just running away from oppression and moving towards the coast. That's what it's been, which we can show you in a different video if you still have doubts. But if you think the slave trade was where one person will carry one person to another place, it's a big lie. Let us also reference fighting the slave hunters in Central Africa. a record of 26 years of travel and adventure around the Great Lakes and of the overthrow of the Tip-Tibble, Rumeliza, and other great slave traders. Note this very well, by Alfred J. Swan, and it was published 1910. And there it shows us that in the wake of the slave raiders, a village raided by slave hunters who have partially destroyed the huts and pitched away the cooking pots, a solitary individual has crept back from his hiding place to find his home desolate and all the relatives gone into slavery. Suicide is often the sequel. Now, this viewer is telling us that it is the same people. You come and carry one person and everybody will be looking at you and you'll be carrying him and be going. You see how senseless people can be. Now, he is trying to look at the scenario at that time in the light of modern day scenario where they hear that some people were kidnapped for money. So that will be very clear. They kidnapped them to say, if you don't give us this amount, we won't release you. That's totally different. But he is now claiming that that's the person will now bind whoever he wants to sell, carry him to the slave market, as if the slave master is even so foolish to buy somebody who is unconscious. You can see that people reason without reasoning end to end, which is most unfortunate, especially if this person is a Negro or even anyone that has sympathy for Negroes. So that's the challenge we have. We challenge him to show us how possible it is that, okay, whoever came here, hit one person and ran away and the whole village disappeared. It's the army. The army was the slave hunting terror group. That's where it started from. All you can do to understand these things is to look at the body language of the slave masters when things like these so-called South African xenophobic attacks happen. You see how they pipe it and shout as if they haven't want to fall. But then they will kill hundreds and thousands in a place like Biafra, in a place like Ambazonia, in Nigeria, in the Middle Belt areas. They pretend not to see. That should give you right there some reason to be concerned, to ask basic questions. Now, if you think the media in Nigeria is not controlled, you are sleeping. When you wake up, you will try to find out. You see how they are discussing the South African so-called xenophobic attacks. Why not ask yourself why nobody discusses that one when it happens in Nigeria? They will pretend they don't know who did it. They will say it's bandits, all kinds of things, but you cannot talk about it freely like you talk about the South African ones. That should tell you that they are still doing the same thing they have been doing, and they think nobody knows. Let us, in conclusion, reference a new account of some parts of Guinea and the slave trade containing the history of the late conquest of the kingdom of Wida by the king of Dahomey. Now remember, we told you that they created Yoruba from Dahomey. That's how Dahomey disappeared. The reason they are able to get away with all this is, like we told you, the Hamitic and Negroid groups are not very intelligent. They lack honor. So if you come and tell them that there is this drug you have, if you were to give it to the Negroes, they will all start doing this or doing that. We'll give you some money. Take it and help us do it. They will do it. That's why you see the army that doesn't manufacture any drugs coming to give people immunization of monkeypox, if you remember a few years ago. So that's the same thing they do. They understand where the fools live in that area. So it goes further to say the manner how the Negroes become slaves, the numbers of them yearly exported from Guinea to America. Meanwhile, if you see these Indian wannabes, they will tell you that, oh no, it is to other parts of America, not their USA. They forget that when it was Britain as well, the Negroes there made the same claims that they were in heaven. That's just it. But let's go further. And it was by Captain William Snellgrave, and it was published 1734. And here we see a map. Our interest in this map is the location of Ghana. So now you see that Ghana, like we saw in some of the books, if you have been following our videos and if you have been conducting your own research, you will discover that Ghana is somewhere near Sokoto in Nigeria today. That's where the kingdom of Ghana was, and it was desolated at that time. Now they brought the Gold Coast, you can see where the Gold Coast is, and named it Ghana in the 50s. And of course, you see the so-called African Americans, because they refuse to read, they have no knowledge of their history. They are now going to where the warehouse of the slaves were, as if that's where they came from. So in the next few years now, when those people rise against them, they will start saying, oh, they thought they were their brothers, or the slave master will help them start saying Africans sold other Africans. They must look out for who their brothers are. They are not from Ghana. We still tell you that. Look at it yourself. You see where it says Kingdom of Ghana right on top there. You see Goba. This is where Sokoto is today, because they've been conquered by the Fulanis. Now you see the Ashanti that they talk about is quite way above. It's not even near the Gold Coast. So it was just brought in for the slave masters to use them against the Negroes. Well, you can at least see that none of the names there today is the same as the names that were there. And of course, you also notice that things like Yoruba, things like Igbo, things like whatever haven't even appeared at that time. That's why we tell you that Negroes are a particular group. It is those groups that they are targeting. It doesn't matter if they change their name, because when they condition a Negro as Yoruba, he starts acting and living Yoruba. When they condition him as Igbo, the same thing. So it's incumbent on you, especially if you went to school, to wake up and look at what happened before the slave trade ended. And of course, you understand things like why they want the Indian appellation, and anything they are doing at any time, you will be able to read and understand their body language or what they have planned. And of course, here we come to the end of this edition of the Negro Appellation, a Reply Part 1. We thank you very much for listening, and we do hope you will find time to conduct your own research. Peace.